Hello and welcome to Aquaponics Automated. Today we're going to be talking about the different types of aquaponics systems. Now, getting started into aquaponics can be pretty hard and confusing since there are three main types of aquaponics systems, and it's kind of hard to tell the differences between each. In this video, I'm going to go over the pros, cons, and a detailed description of what each of these techniques is. So let's get started. So there are three main types of aquaponics systems. There's deep water culture, where the plants float on a raft in pools of water. There's nutrient film technique, where the water flows past the roots of the plants, and the roots absorb the nutrients. And there's media-based, which is the most common one, where the plants grow in media-filled areas that flood and drain periodically. So how I'm going to be grading these is by their difficulty, their size, how easy they are to use, access, and maintenance, how complex they are to design, and how much they cost. So I'll also be talking about how much produce they yield, because that's a pretty important aspect if you're going to be doing this on a commercial level. So let's get started with deep water culture. So the first method we're going to be discussing is deep water culture, or DWC for short if you like abbreviations. So pretty much what this method is rafts of plants float in pools of water filled with nutrients from the fish. And this method is pretty cool because it actually originated in Aztec times, where they had massive rafts built on a big lake, and they had pretty much an aquaponics system going. So this is also the simplest design, as it's just a raft floating in a pool of water. And the other cool thing that could happen in the future is this being upscaled to like lake-sized systems to provide food for like towns and stuff, which would be pretty cool. So let's get on to the pros and cons of deep water culture. So deep water culture is definitely the easiest system to build, as all you need is a tub, some styrofoam, and net pots, and you can have a working system within like a day. And this is really great for beginners because you can just get started really easily, and you can do lots of cool experiments and stuff in there. Size variability, this is also pretty cool. You can go from a tabletop system with just a 10-gallon tank all the way up to lake-sized systems like the Aztecs had. For ease of use, deep water culture can be kind of annoying in a smaller system and even in bigger systems because the roots get tangled pretty easily, and if you have the raft on top of the fish tank, then it's pretty much impossible to get down to the fish. And if there's a dead one, you can't get to it, and harvesting them can be really annoying. The complexity, though, is definitely the least because it's just a tub and a raft. That's all there is, and maybe some are connected. And the cost is mid-range because stock tanks, fish tanks, those can be fairly expensive, depending on what kind of quality you want. So that's deep water culture. We're now going to move on to nutrient film technique. So nutrient film technique, in my opinion, is definitely the most interesting of the various methods. So pretty much how it works, as you can see on the screen, is the water flows through a PVC pipe usually, and it goes through the roots of the plants, and the flowing of it through the roots of the plants filters it, and then it runs back down into the fish tank. So the cool things about this one are it's super efficient in cost, which is really helpful if you're just getting started. And it's usually incorporated into other systems. So say I have like two fish tanks and there's a pipe going between them, you can turn that into a nutrient film technique system, and which is like really cool. And it's also really good for vertical farms. So there are entire greenhouses where it's just hanging nutrient film technique systems, and they can be portable. They take up very little space, and they're really awesome. So let's get on to the pros and cons of nutrient film technique. Difficulty-wise, nutrient film technique, or NFT, is a little bit more difficult. It's definitely more difficult than deep water culture, but it's not quite as complex as media-based. So you do have to adjust some things like the flow rate through the pipe and a few other things, and it can be a little bit harder to get started. For size, it's medium-sized to industrial. You can't really make a super small nutrient film technique system, but you can do really good vertical farms, as I mentioned earlier, in greenhouses. Ease of use, it's pretty easy to use. You just take the plants out, You don't have to go digging through media or untangle roots. So it's probably the easiest one to use. Complexity, it's of moderate complexity because you do have to do a little bit of planning for the pipes, but it is a little bit easier because pipes are much lighter and you don't have to build as complex framework to support them. The cost, it's definitely the cheapest option, which makes it a great beginner system. And all of these are really good beginner systems, but this one is probably one of the better ones if you're willing to do a little bit more research. It's definitely the cheapest one. So that's nutrient film technique. Now we're going to move on to the most popular method, which is media-based or MediaBed. So in media-based aquaponics, the plants grow in grow beds that are full of clay pebbles or some other type of grow medium, and the water is pumped up to these grow beds, and once it reaches a certain height, it is drained back down into the fish tank. So some cool things about media-based is that it's definitely the most common type of aquaponics, and when most people think of aquaponics, this is what they think of. So it has the biggest community of members, so there are lots of people making designs for it, lots of people that can help with it, which is really great for people getting started into it. It's also really great for all plants because plants like beets or carrots can grow in it because it's a more traditional soil medium. You can also grow bigger plants like small trees and stuff like that in it. The other really cool thing about media-based is it's very compatible with recycled materials like old barrels, like the 55-gallon barrels, and stuff like bathtubs. So you can really get creative with it and reuse a lot of materials, which can make it cheaper. So now we're going to move on to the pros and cons of media-based. So media-based is a very interesting case when looking at the pros and cons of it. So it's very difficult to build and use because it requires a lot of resources, woodworking to build a frame to hold these like hundreds of gallons up. You need a little bit more experience, you need filters, you need all kinds of stuff. And it's probably the hardest one to build. So the size, it's medium size to industrial. It's pretty hard to have a small one, and it's also very, very expensive to have bigger ones. So it's kind of in the mid-range. And the ease of use, it's good. It's pretty easy to use because you're just digging out plants from within like a gravel-like substance, and the fish have like a large open area to swim around in, and which makes them easy to catch, easy to take out dead ones, and very easy to access. Problems, it's definitely the most complex system because you have to worry about auto siphons, you have to worry about all sorts of things with water flow, and I've learned this building my own. It's definitely the most complex system. The cost, it's definitely also the most expensive system because you need grow beds, you need grow media, you need fish tank, you need all pumps. I mean, you need that for the other ones, especially NFT, but it adds up very quickly. But there are some pros to it, and that's that it usually yields more than the other types of systems. So for doing it on an industrial scale, you can do it really well. Also, if you're doing it on a more industrial scale, you can afford it more because you can make wooden grow beds instead of buying really expensive plastic ones. And you can do stuff to really cut down the cost and get the most out of it. Now, that is interesting because nutrient film technique is gaining a lot of traction with doing vertical farms. So if you're going to do one on an industrial scale, doing media-based or doing nutrient film technique with a vertical farm is going to be the best option. But media-based can also be really good for having a good, efficient home system like the one I'm building right now. So now we're going to move on to a summary of all of them and trying to decide which one is right for you depending on your circumstances. So now onto the big question, which one of these systems is best for you? So I myself started out with the nutrient film technique system, which worked out really well because it was pretty cheap to build, and it was also very easy to construct, and I got results pretty fast. But as we're going to go over, it's really dependent on what resources you have and how much time you have. But really, you can choose any of these, and you'll be fine, and you'll be able to create a really cool system that can produce plants and fish for your kitchen. So for deep water culture, if you don't want to commit that much time or money into an aquaponics system, this is probably the best one because you can set it up really quick and it doesn't use quite as much money as the other ones. It's also really good for having it on a desktop. So if you want a system on your kitchen to grow some basil, which I did, it works really well for that. If you're committed, but you don't have that much space, nutrient film technique is probably the best one for you because you can do a vertical farm, and with a little bit more research, you can build a really cool vertical farm that hangs from the ceiling and you can have tons of produce, so it works really well. And if you want lots of produce though, you have a little bit more space, maybe a little bit more money, you probably want to do media-based because it's the most supported method. It is a little bit harder to do though, but the results will be really good. I'm building one of these right now. It's definitely a lot harder, but it's going to produce a lot of plants and fish. If you want to look more into any of these topics, I'll put a few links in the description below on some really good websites and books that I've used as resources that have really helped me. I'll also be coming out with a more detailed how-to video for each of these systems in the very near future, so watch out for those. If you enjoyed the content in this video, feel free to subscribe. If you didn't, then don't subscribe. But anyways, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video.